Okay, so one more video for now, and sorry, I'm using this new stand thing, so I'm trying to get the right height or something. Okay, let's try that. So what I wanted to talk about just briefly is trauma, because I mention this a lot. I mention it. If you've emailed me, I maybe have mentioned that I have it all over my blog, and that's because it is such a huge concept that explains so much about what y'all are going through, what you're experiencing right now, that until I understood what it was, or I started gaining an understanding of what it was, I was really in the dark about, what it is that the symptoms that I was having after my bad trip, and after, frankly, other things in my life that were negative or hard to deal with. And just to clarify, this is not trauma. Trauma, as I talk about it, is not my concept. And, in some way I hesitate to do my own video about this because it's such a broad concept. It's such a, there's so much to know about it, and there's so many other videos that I'm sure have people explaining it better than I could have, but I do want to explain it as I see it in the context of the bad trip, because I think it would be helpful for y'all, and that's my goal. So trauma, as I talk about it, is not the same thing as, like the emergency room, the trauma unit, or the trauma ward, or anything like that. It's not like suddenly I have like a giant pole going through my body or something because I was in a hurricane or a tornado, where my limb got cut off. It's not that. It's an emotional principle, and it comes from a protective mechanism in our brains that basically is protecting us in times of life or death, and making us kind of protecting our emotional well-being and psyche in a situation in which death is really likely. So basically what happens is you are going along, and this is kind of your normal emotional state. You're going along through life, and then all of a sudden you're being chased. If you're a really primitive human, you're being chased by a lion, okay? And so your level of emotions, of hormones, of everything spikes. And there is a point at which it cuts off, and your brain and your conscious, rational thinking faculties are no longer monitoring or staying in touch with this spike. So it's like the spike is going up, and then you just go offline, is essentially what happens. It just cuts off because it's protecting you from basically emotional overload and being able to not handle the reality of what you're going through. Because if you think about it, if you're being chased by a lion, the emotional reality of that, the emotional reality of the fact that you may die, if your brain allowed you to fully feel that, you would probably not be able to handle it, much less put everything you had into running from the lion. So we developed this, or we're given this ability to kind of go offline and disconnect from what's going on emotionally when it gets too real to handle, so that we could get through the situation and come out alive. Because there's two outcomes of this kind of situation that I'm talking about, and one outcome is you die, and then that's it. And your kind of emotional monitoring of the situation has shut offline well before you go, and that's that. And who knows what happens then. But the other case is that you come out alive, which is where we all are. And the problem of trauma is that this part that split off from you that was no longer monitored, because it was no longer monitored and kind of integrated into our rational brain, it never gets, it never gets resolved. And it's never has that emotional moment that says, this is over. It kind of just always, it's just there. And what happens is that emotional pattern, that emotional kind of feeling of complete and total life or death, crazy, heightened, it never gets resolved, and so it gets stored somewhere in your body. And so then as you continue on through your normal, baseline life, all of a sudden you feel a heightened level of anxiety, a heightened level of maybe you're having panic attacks now, and it's coming from that emotional loop that is basically running in the background. And so, like, you may be into computers, and I am on a very basic level, that, if you have some program running in the background and that's new, your computer, and you don't really even realize it's there, your computer's going to start running differently. Or think of it as a virus. It's like that you would get on your computer, and suddenly it's like mining Bitcoin on your machine in the background, and you don't know. And so your computer starts acting really weird. Well, that's like a trauma. It's suddenly this thing that you have within you that is maybe causing panic attacks, or maybe it's constantly making you feel like you're gonna die, or like you're gonna have a heart attack, or like, I don't know, whatever it is that you feel now. And it's because it's stored within you. It never got resolved, and so it's just there, and it's wreaking havoc on you now. And so for a lot of people that have had bad trips, this is basically what has happened. And I'm not saying every case, but in a lot of cases, let's say you had a trip in which you really felt like you were going to die, or you really felt like you were going to have a heart attack or something, or you really felt like people were going to abandon you. The example that I gave of the lion, that is what we would call a real life or death situation, where that lion could really, kill you and eat you. But the fact of the matter is that the emotional primitive brain does not see the difference, does not have a way to process whether or not something is truly life or death or not. To a child, to like a 2-year-old, their piece of cake that they have on their high chair falling and hitting the floor, and they no longer have it, that could be life or death, and that could create the kind of trauma that I'm talking about. I mean, it sounds weird, but you have to think about these in emotional terms. It's not logical. So if you were having that kind of really traumatic, really terrifying trip, your emotional self probably went offline as a self-protective means to get you through that experience. And it's very helpful in the moment to get you through that experience, to kind of let your emotions just kind of disconnect from it, and that's very helpful. But the reality of it now that you're through the experience, is that, oh my gosh, I'm having all kinds of anxiety now. I feel crazy. I feel like I could die at any moment, or just I could have an allergic reaction. Am I gonna have a heart attack? You know, the feeling, any random little sensation in my body triggers me to go into some kind of freak out mode about having a stroke or having, I don't know, just dying in some way. Or anytime I'm alone now, it feels like I'm gonna be alone forever. Whatever it is, if you're having this kind of recurring anxiety that is really has no emotional or no logical explanation, but is really just coming up over and over again, especially if it relates to something that was a fear during your trip. Like if you during your trip had this immense fear that your friends were going to leave you behind, and now whenever you're alone or whenever people leave, you just get really worked up. It's likely that you have some sort of trauma going on. It's likely that that whole process of shutting off from your emotions during the trip in order to protect you, it's likely that that happened, and the reason you're getting all those recurring anxieties or panic attacks is because of that unresolved program or virus or loop that's running in the background now that was not there before. And so this is something that I often bring up when people feel like they're going crazy because they just don't have any control over it. You're not going crazy. You have a trauma now. It's new. Okay, so that's what it is. And so now what to do about it. The good news is that you can fix this. There are a lot of techniques for how to fix it. And I'm not going to go into that super in depth today, but what I will talk about, and so if you really feel like this is what you're going through, a great resource for it is a guy named David Snyder, SNYDER. He has all kinds of YouTube videos. He's pretty quirky, but I really like his content, and he is a master of this kind of stuff. But there are lots of people who talk about trauma and who have resources for you that all you have to do is type in emotional trauma on YouTube, and maybe definitely include emotional, because you don't know what you'll find otherwise as far as like physical trauma. But yeah, just type in emotional trauma on YouTube. You'll get all kinds of techniques, and they're probably much better explained than I can do. But one thing you can start with doing is, so I briefly mentioned that trauma, when it occurs, is stored in your body. And so most people think of the head as, where your brain is at, but really your entire body is this sort of, it's your consciousness and your thinking processes incorporate your entire body. And like your gut, the biome, the microorganisms in your gut contribute to the way your brain functions. And I don't want to go too much into that. There's also a ton of YouTube video stuff you can look at with all of that. But the trauma gets stored somewhere in your body, and it gets stored in a package that has attributes such as color, shape, texture, size, and I really hope I'm not losing people here because it can sound a little wacky, and if you get into working with it and you've ever come across, or if you've ever come across somebody who has had success with it, it's real. I mean, I know for sure it's real. It's worked for me to work with these kinds of shapes and colors. It's just a way that your conscious mind or your emotional mind and your conscious processing of it, it's just a way of categorizing it. So what you can do to kind of see if maybe trauma applies to you in your situation is next time you feel those sensations of anxiety, or when you just think about it, see if, close your eyes and see if you get a color or a place in your body or a certain shape or something. Like maybe you start to have your panic about having a heart attack, and just pause for a second, go inside of yourself and see, do I get a sense of a color when I think of this feeling? Or when I really embody this feeling, am I getting some kind of shape? Where is it in my body? Try to find where the fear and the anxiety is located in your body. You may immediately say like, oh, it's coming from my head, but no, like really go inside and see like, oh my gosh, it's coming from my kind of stomach region or my shoulder or something, and this can kind of start to show you, or it has this really black, weird, or green color sensation. This can start to show you, okay, if you can point to it on your body, if you can see a color with it, it is trauma. It's a trauma. And again, if my explanation of it's sounding too wacky for you, go look at David Snyder. He does a really good job of explaining it, but you'll get the same color thing from him, because this is real. It's not magical or anything like that. It's a real way of that your body processes this stuff. And so, a good example of it is like, if you've ever heard of somebody who has a leg or an arm or something amputated, and they end up with a phantom part of their body, their brain, they don't have that part of their body anymore, but their brain still recognizes it, and their brain has a map to where it is. So this is a similar thing, that your brain has kind of an overlay, your consciousness has an overlay map over your body, and it uses it to store things and store information. And another thing you can do just to kind of experiment with this idea is like, think of a moment that is so happy for you. Maybe, one of the greatest moments you can think of, or something that was just gave you so much joy. And close your eyes, and while you're holding that in your mind and in your heart, just see where it's located in your body. Where is that feeling coming from? What color is it? And what you're going for here is not some kind of conscious idea of it, or it's just immediately what comes to you. I'm thinking of this time, and it was so great, and it's green, and it's right here, and it may be inside your body, it may be outside of your body, but our bodies are just enormous kind of storage units for emotional material. So that's a way to kind of start seeing if you're dealing with a trauma, and if you are, then that's great, because you know what you're dealing with, and just, I would start investigate it heavily on YouTube. There's lots of great resources, but yeah, and I think I think that trauma is the case for a lot of people who are going through a bad trip, because I think that these experiences are so traumatic. I mean, so traumatic, because not only are they Oh, you know what? I just realized I can angle that down. Okay. Sorry, that's better. They're so traumatic because, unlike any kind of external traumatic event, you experience them entirely alone. A bad trip happens within your own consciousness, within you alone. And like if you go through a bad breakup or if you get in a car accident or something like that, it's really, really traumatic, and you're going to have trauma from it. You're going to have emotional trauma from it. But our society gives us words and kind of a framework in which to understand those events, but with a bad trip, there's no societal norm. There's no framework. There's no way to say, okay, if you have a bad trip, this is what happens. I mean that's one thing that I'm trying to do here. But as far as like a broad, readily accepted norm, that doesn't really exist at this point, which is sad because a lot of people go through this and a lot of people have similar experiences. But without that kind of context and framework that most traumatic events in society are given, it's really hard. I would say a difficult psychedelic experience is even harder than an external trauma that may even involve like severe injuries and things like that, because it's so private and so personal and so not talked about and mysterious. And for a lot of people, there's a ton of shame involved with it. I mean, just honestly, like, if you have a bad trip, not only do you feel so worried and anxious and panicked, and maybe you have physical ailments too now, but gosh, you just feel like, I knew I shouldn't have been doing these drugs, or I knew I shouldn't have taken psychedelics. I mean, anybody would have told me that. Or the people, I mean, not only that, but the people who I was tripping with, they didn't have a weird, bad experience like this. What's wrong with me? Why am I so crazy? There's so much shame, and I think a lot of it comes from the fact that there's not a good understanding on a broad basis of what a bad trip is and means. But I hope that seeing, kind of hearing my explanation of trauma, and if you start to look it up online too, on YouTube as a whole, and you start to really broaden your horizons of understanding of what all the brain is capable of and the emotions are capable of, I think that you'll feel comforted, because there really is a framework. Our society does not value it or talk about it. There really are norms, and it's really okay what you're going through. You don't have to be ashamed. It's just the silence around it all kind of breeds the shame and the fear that maybe you're going crazy, or maybe you're schizophrenic. You're not. I really 99.99999% sure you're not. I'm not. But I did have trauma, and I think you probably do too if you're experiencing the kind of situation that I'm explaining, and that's okay. You'll get through it. Start looking up videos. Just get insatiably hungry for information about healing, and get insatiably hungry for positivity in this situation. Because if you just let yourself be down in the dumps and you don't force yourself to be positive, you're not going to get better from this. You're just going to continue to get worse. So I just want to emphasize how important it is that you really take ownership of this situation. It's okay. You're going to be okay. You're not broken. You didn't mess up your brain permanently. You really will be okay. But you're going to have to work to get better. You're going to have to put in the effort. But you'll get there. And I hope that this kind of explanation of trauma was helpful. Because once I understood trauma and once I started applying it to my own life and my own healing, everything changed for me. It made much more sense. And the other thing that I did want to mention is that even beyond the trauma that a trip can create, it can also reawaken past trauma. If you went through some really difficult things in your life, or you're, like in your childhood or something, a difficult trip can bring that out and kind of reawaken old traumas and start making you aware of what's really going on inside you. One thing that trips kind of tend to do is strip away levels of numbness, and kind of like a sleepness that we gain through going through life. And I think that that's something that a lot of people want when they go into a psychedelic experience. But, for some of us who go through these difficult things, we weren't expecting to get woken up in that way and, getting reawakened to the past, to how shitty your childhood was or all those horrible things that you had to go through. But the thing of it is that it's really good for that to happen, no matter how painful it is. And I'm speaking from experience here, because you can finally resolve those things that are stored within you and stored within your heart, and you can get rid of them, and you can move on, and you can become a more free and more light person. And so a lot of people that I've talked to, they say, oh, I was using psychedelics to heal myself, or to get more connected to myself, or get more connected spiritually, or wake myself up, getting my consciousness more aware, and everything, and it was all good until now. And then this trip, I'm like, well, this is the next level of that. This is the next evolution in you becoming awakened as a person and becoming connected to yourself is like you chipped away at all the good stuff. You got all the good stuff out, out of the way. But here's some rough, difficult stuff that is kind of buried a little bit further down. And once you got the stuff stripped away that was good and light and breezy, now you're dealing with the core, or a deeper level of what's going on within you. And that's a good thing, but it's hard. It's a really good thing, and you should value it even more than you value those positive trips, because it's going to help you more in the long run. Even though things, it's like things get worse before they can get better sometimes, and that's all you're going through. So yeah, this is getting kind of long, but explore trauma, and I hope it can help you. And of course, contact me with any questions you have, and I just want to be a resource for you, the resource that I would have really liked to have when I was going through this, and the resource that I really think would be helpful. So yeah, good luck with everything, and stay strong.